Welcome to Unearthed Realities podcast, a podcast where we speak to interesting people. We talk about unique topics. We talk about taboo topics. Today, we're joined by Sophie Myers, who is a witch, I believe. Welcome to the show. I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Yes, so my name is Sophie. I am what you would call a witch or a modern day witch. I'm also religiously Wiccan as well. So.
Okay, interesting. Because that was one of the questions I wanted to bring up, so I suppose we'll bring that up straight away.
No, that's all right.
What is Wiccan? What is that all about?
So it's sort of very similar to witchcraft in some ways, but it's much more religious side of the practice. You can be Wiccan without being a witch, and you can also be a witch without being Wiccan. I just so happen to be both. Okay. So religiously, it tends to be, it can be just about anything, but it derives from the way that you worship your gods or communicate with your gods, even in some instances. So for me personally, I can't speak on behalf of everyone, of course, because it's very, very wide array. But for me personally, I worship a few Norse gods and a few Celtic gods as well. And it's essentially just very, very earth-based, so very, very grounded. So we give offerings. I have an altar at home that I put offerings on. For my gods, and it's just the religious side of witchcraft, really. But like I say, you can do one without doing the other if you want to. Okay.
What exactly is the difference between kind of witchcraft and being a Wiccan? So you're saying like the Wiccan side of it is more the religious side?
Yes.
Is the witchcraft, how does that differentiate?
The witchcraft is more of the practice side. Okay. So a lot of witches will say they practice rather than saying they are a witch. It's a term that I use quite frequently as well. And it's more, depending on what kind of witchcraft you prefer, there's lots of different kinds. You can pick and choose, cherry pick the bits from the best parts. But personally, I am what people would call a green witch. So I do a lot of work with plants. I also consider myself a bit of a kitchen witch, so cooking, things like that. We try to integrate our magic and things like that and our intentions into the things we cook, and in my case as well into the things that I grow in my garden. I like to have a lot of plants around me, and I like to use them especially for medicinal purposes as well. So it's the more proactive side, I would probably say. So it's more practice, less worship. So yes. like I say, you can do the practice if you're a non-religious individual, but then you can also do the religious part if you don't fancy the practice part either. Okay.
And you mentioned there as well about like kind of nature getting involved, and obviously this kind of threads of nature running through both Wiccan beliefs and kind of witchcraft in a way. Yeah. How specifically does it run through for you? I know you said obviously in the garden, in cooking. Does it run through any other way?
So I'm very, you can have, like I say, you can have different kinds of witches. I'm very earth-based. You can have sea witches. There's also this thing called hedge witches, and a lot of people get slightly confused by it when you say it initially, but the hedge part refers to working both in the earth aspect, so the people who are living, and the death aspect, the hedge being like the fold between life and death. So a lot of mediums will often identify as like hedge witches, for example. For myself, as a green witch and a bit of a kitchen witch, it's more the home and the garden aspect, and just being grounded, and it's all about living in the earth as it is, rather than trying to ignore it in a way. So it's more respect for the earth itself. So if I was to pick some of my aloe vera, I would literally say thank you to the plant.
Whereas
a lot of people would just go, oh yes, no, I'm just going to pick that piece of aloe vera up. I would literally say thank you to the plant, and I have had some weird looks from my partner before for it.
Okay, so it sounds like it comes over into your personal life a lot more then.
Yes, it does.
Is this something that you practice on the daily, or is it something that, how does this kind of incorporate into your identity?
I probably should practice on the daily, but I don't. I won't lie about it. but I do practice rather regularly. I have, like I say, my altar at home, which I do a lot of worship-based stuff with, and then whenever I'm cooking and things like that, obviously I use a lot of my herbs and things in my cooking. When I say practice, though, I mean active practice, so active worship where I'm praying, doing spells, things like that. When it comes to sort of everyday stuff, I do implement it on a near daily basis. So because a lot of people always say, I've had a few friends say to me, well, I don't want to do it. I want to do it, but I don't want to do it at home because a family member doesn't agree with it or something like that. And my answer would always be, you can still do it. It's not something they need to know about. So even as simple as burning a candle, you can worship inside your head. Or for example, I make a sigil, which is like a mark, which has a meaning behind it. In my foundation, if I'm doing my foundation on a morning, or I might do it on my concealer as well. So it's all it's very easy to implement into your life, and I do that on a daily basis, but I don't sort of actively worship or actively do spells and things like that on a daily basis. Okay.
And where are you getting this kind of information from? Is it kind of religious materials? Is it more
a plethora of things?
Yeah.
So for witchcraft, unless you're from a sort of ancestral lineage of witches, it is going to be hard to come by any sort of, for lack of a better term, Bible-like book that's going to tell you what you should and shouldn't be doing. For me, it was mostly through friends who were already aware of it, through sort of the internet, through general reading as it is. But there's no sort of, it's why it's so wide and so varied, and no witch will ever do what they do exactly the same as another witch, unless they're family or in a coven, really. But it's very, very wide in that sense, and there's no one-two sort of book that you would ever be able to just pick up, read, and go, oh yeah, that sounds nice, I'm going to be a witch now. Because it's a lot more difficult than that. Yeah. It is research. There is no other way around it, really. There are a lot of witches, myself included, who keep something called a Book of Shadows, also known as a grimoire as well, that they might write a lot of their things in, and if they have children that just so happen to also want to follow that path, then they can hand that down to them, and that's what I mean by the ancestral witches sort of lineage thing. But I unfortunately wasn't fortunate enough to get that, so it was more a case of just research and research, and I am still learning, and I've been doing it for about 3 years now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How exactly did you get into it? Was it through
It was through a friend that mentioned it. They were what you call a sea witch, or a water witch. So they were very, very in tune with bodies of water, and they did their magic around bodies of water. They would do things like charging water under the full moon and stuff for sort of medicinal purposes or prosperity purposes, depending on what it is, really. And I saw it through the lenses of their life. And I was introduced to it through that, but I didn't quite click with the water witch part, and that's when I then obviously started the research aspect of going into it, and that's when I found what I prefer.
Yeah, for sure. Before as well, you mentioned kind of like covens. You mentioned like a grimoire as well. These are all kind of terms I've heard more so myself through kind of pop culture, TV, movies. What impact do you think that has had on kind of like maybe misrepresentation or maybe representation in a way? What culture, how does that affect it?
A lot of instances, especially historically, maybe not so much modern, but definitely historically, witches are definitely portrayed in a very negative light, and grimoires are spell books of evil and things like that. And I think a lot of it comes from as well, and I'm not entirely sure on the complete truth of this, whether this is something I've read and it is actually true, or whether it's something I've read and it just sounds like it should be true.
Okay.
But I did hear something about how books that were obviously referred to as like actual grimoire books that were taken from healers, like historically, used terms like Eye of Newt and things like that, which is something you've probably definitely heard of.
Yeah, for sure, yeah.
But they're actually in reference to plants, and a lot of those terms like Eye of Newt, frog or something like that would be in reference to a plant, and it's obviously just a terminology that they would use in order to keep to themselves their recipes for their herbs that are making people better. Because obviously you wouldn't want to share.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to share that really back then, would you? If you knew that knowledge, that would be what would get you to be the interesting individual. So
exactly, yeah,
so,
the secret recipe.
Yeah.
Almost,
so then of course people think, oh no, Eye of Newt. You're taking animals and you're putting it in a poultice and you're making a spell with it, and then it does in that case sound very dodgy, but
okay.
In reality it's not necessarily the case. But it is, I think pop culture has had in the past a rather negative impact on witchcraft as well, and it often tends to get blurred with Satanism as well, and even that in and of itself is misunderstood. But obviously that's a completely different kettle of fish, really.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, but
in terms of the apocryphy side of things as well, talking about like Eye of Newt.
Yeah.
There's kind of, you were also talking earlier about being a green witch, and that has like kind of traditional medicines or alternative medicines. Does that go hand in hand with witchcraft in any way?
Yeah, so it really depends on what kind of witch you are. If you are an astrology witch, you will deal primarily with the stars. However, you may choose to implement herbs in some of your cleansing rituals, for example, at home, like sage is often used for cleansing in homes as well. But it's a difficult question to answer because it's really highly dependent on what sort of witch you are. So I would say that sort of kitchen witchcraft and green witchcraft, which is what I sort of lean towards, is probably where you will see the most herbs utilised and things like that. But there are obviously others that may enjoy astrology-based witchcraft, or there may be a water witch, or there may be a hedge witch, and it's not necessarily that their practice is rooted in herbs in any way, but they may still choose to use them in the same way that I would absolutely refer to myself as a green witch, but I will still do elements of kitchen witchcraft, and I will still do tarot cards as well, which is like, if you were to try and set it out into different groups, it is totally out of the green witch realm.
Okay.
And altogether.
Yeah.
So it's a case of cherry picking.
Yeah.
Bits that you do and you don't like, and like I said before, that's why you will never have two witches realistically that do things the same way.
Okay.
Because
there's always
very much so. Yeah.
One more thing as well. Talking about like the taboo side of witchcraft, and well, you hear about like hexes, voodoo, kind of dark magics in a way. Can you explore that in any way, like the kind of the morals behind it at all, or whether it's kind of overblown in the media? Or
so again, it depends on the witch. So I have done, it's often anything that's sort of would fall under the morally grey. And I say that in air quotes because I'm going to explain in a second, but anything that would come under the sort of morally grey side of witchcraft is massively sort of, I don't even know what the word is. People look at it and they go, no.
Taboo, I guess.
Massively taboo. Whereas in reality, if you're actually doing it, and I mean a highly controversial opinion, if you're doing it correctly, you're not being aggressive with it. So voodoo can be used for positive things as well. For example, most voodoo-based stuff is what's called a closed practice, though, and I am not part of that sort of ethnic group, for lack of a better term. So I don't know much on it, but I know that it can be used for good things and it can be used for bad things. I won't speak any more on it just purely because it is a closed practice.
Of course.
But there are other aspects, so also referred to as baneful magic. So I've done bits and pieces of baneful magic before, where spell jars, which are my preferred way of containing or using a spell, will contain things like nails, shards of broken glass. In my case, if I ever find dead, this sounds really weird, but if I ever find dead wasps or bees or anything like that, I won't kill them, but I'll take them if they are dead on the floor, and I will put them in a glass jar and I will use them for baneful magic. But it's not necessarily me being an aggressor, because I have a jar at home that is what would be considered baneful magic. And all it does is it means if someone comes, it is a protection jar. So if someone comes into my home and they start, I don't know, smashing something up, it just means that spell will work in a way that when they go home or when they leave, whatever they have dealt to me will be returned to them sort of threefold. So it's not necessarily me being actively aggressive. It is me protecting myself, but in a baneful way. So if someone comes and does something bad happens to them again, which in all fairness is the basic premise of witchcraft in and of itself, that it's one of the main rules. It's the rule of 3. So whatever you deal out into the world returns to you threefold. Okay. So if you're doing things correctly, you're not doing it in an aggressive manner. Most magics are not in an aggressive, because you can't do it in an aggressive manner realistically if you're doing it correctly and you're doing it sensibly. Yeah. Obviously, there is probably groups of people out there that claim that they use it for negative reasons, and they're probably doing it to be a little bit edgy, for lack of a better term. But it's very controversial, though. This particular topic does tend to spark a lot of anger, because there'll be people that are in one field and then there'll be people who are in another field. I'm totally open about it, and I will always tell people what I believe about it, but other people don't want to start fights over it, and it is a very touchy subject, because especially with a lot of the stigma as well, people who sit in my sort of seat, I'll be totally honest, we don't necessarily like the people that pretend they do it just to be aggressive, purely because it feeds that stigma, and the opinion of witchcraft tends to get worse. And it just starts to look almost like a game that someone's playing, or a phase that someone's going through, just for the sake of making themselves look a little bit better. So it is very controversial. Yeah. So not many people do tend to speak up about it, unfortunately, really. No,
that's fascinating. That's why we're here. That was awesome.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. I think that's all the time we have for today. I could gladly go on for hours, but this has been fantastic. Do you have any closing messages for anyone? Anything you want to let people know?
Yeah. If anyone does ever want to get into it, or if it's anything that interests anyone, reaching out to other witches, most of them will be very, very open, and most of them will speak to you about what they want. And research, because there are things out there like closed practices which certain people cannot do because it's ancestrally related, and to do it is massively disrespectful. So my main message would be, if anyone wants to do it, just research. That's the only thing I can really say, really. Okay.
No, that was amazing. Thanks so much for coming in.
All right, thank you very much.
This is Unearthed Realities podcast. Check out the podcast on the website, on YouTube, on Spotify. Thank you so much for Sophie for coming in. See you next time, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.